Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this live webinar here. I am Dr. Peter Howard, the president and the founder of the Fulton Sheen Institute. And it's my honor to welcome once again with an interview, more of a style here, Bill Schnieders, who is the co-founder of the Man School, also known as Great Man's Journey. And he's also the creator of the Great Man's Legacy Masterclass that we have introduced at the Fulton Sheen Institute. It's been a real joy collaborating with Bill in order to bring this in. It's something that we've been very excited about for a while. And so what I want to do is, because I really want to respect your time, is I want to basically kind of jump in. What we did not too long ago, about a month ago, we had a webinar, and then we also had a follow-up with Bill that is on the website. And you can go to the FultonSheen.Institute website, and you can see a great introduction by Bill on a lot of his story. It's almost like a sample class. But what I wanted to do with this particular webinar is to focus on your questions and giving you answers, kind of the nuts and bolts of what this masterclass is about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to welcome Bill here, who is joining us from the great state of Montana, and he's on screen with us right now. And so, Bill, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Peter. It's an honor to be here.
Great. Well, Bill, I really want to just kind of dive right in and, basically see and kind of give you the floor as much as I can on those questions that really pertain to you as the creator. You have a lot of insight. But for those who aren't really familiar, help them to know just the nuts and the bolts of what is the Great Man's Legacy Masterclass.
Well, the Great Man's Legacy Masterclass is a best-of-breed personal development program that we put together to basically give you, give the life wisdom that we learned in our lifetime and that we elicited from others. Both myself and the co-founders were tremendous students of personal development. Most of my career was in corporate sales in Silicon Valley. I've traveled to 50 different countries, over 50 different countries. I just had a lot of life experience. And I remember thinking some of the things that I had to learn the hard way. I remember thinking, gosh, I wish somebody could have taught me that when I was in my 20s, or better yet, when I was in school still. And so what we hope to do with this class is, number one, provide a pathway with the best of breed wisdom from some of the brightest, smartest people that have ever lived, that we've studied deeply for decades and elicited their best material, basically taking the fruit of all of what, the best of what they've learned, put it in this class, and then organize that in a systematic fashion. Because the syntax in which you go through it, the order and sequence in which you go through it, also makes a big difference in terms of how easily you assimilate it and so forth. So we've tried to we're trying in this course to save people decades of trial and error learning. And by basically learning from those that have already gone before us, that have been successful. And of course, we're really excited about partnering with the Fulton Sheen Institute because you also bring a spiritual side to it. Our course is primarily a personal development, human formation course, although the founders are all devout spiritual people, including myself. But we decided to kind of focus it, on the masses to kind of reach everybody. And sometimes, unfortunately, if you come across as a Christian program or a Catholic program, there are people that sort of have preconceived notions of that, or perhaps they've had a bad experience. And that, I always say, don't leave Jesus because of Judas. But I understand at the same time, people have had some difficult, sometimes have the wrong perception or something. And so we thought we'd cast a wide net. And of course, the other part of that was there's so many great ministries out there, including your own, that are doing phenomenal work in terms of evangelizing the faith. So we just thought our lane would be best served with all of our business and corporate experience into really espousing this best of breed personal development wisdom from some of the greatest minds that have ever lived, that we have painstakingly studied and applied their principles in our life and really elicited the very best of their material and put it in this format, in this curriculum. So there's certainly a Catholic Christianity infused in it, no doubt. I think any Catholic would probably recognize that. But at the same time, somebody who's in a different place along the journey and searching, I think would also feel very comfortable, because we are talking about primarily human formation and the mental, emotional, the physical, the financial, professional, your career, organization, efficiency, all these different aspects that kind of make up the arena of life, all the different categories within that arena of life. So that's really what I think makes it interesting. I've had actually right now, the majority of the guys going through the course right now are men of faith, but there's a few that are at different places along the journey, and they said, this has been phenomenal. It's actually led me closer to my faith, because as I explore some of these truths, I start to see the symbiosis, the harmony between natural wisdom, human wisdom, and then what I'm hearing you guys espouse from the Bible and the teachings of the church, there's truth is truth, right? And so sometimes seeking the good, the true, and the beautiful in personal and professional development leads you to the ultimate good, the ultimate truth, the ultimate beauty, which is God. So while we're not overtly a Christian ministry of any type, we are very much that is infused throughout. And we just picked a bit different lane to drive in so we can reach the most people and cast a broad net.
Well, yeah, that's great. And that was always a question that I had too, because this element of personal development can have a lot of nuances for people. And I think in many respects, it can be misunderstood. And so I want to revisit that whole question of, because as a Fulton Sheen Institute, we are a Catholic institute, but we are concerned about the formation of the total person. And so I want to revisit that question in a little bit. But as far as, the class itself, what is the structure? How long is it? What can people expect who want to learn more about it?
Yeah, great question. So it is a 6-month masterclass broken up into 22 formal lessons. Then we have several bonus lessons. So it's basically, we've broken up in a way so that somebody who's currently a family guy, busy, job with perhaps a wife and kids at home, could basically take this in bite-sized chunks. So you're able to assimilate it. It's manageable. I've been in my life to weekend seminars. I've been to week-long seminars, corporate trainings. And what I found is that they were wonderful. There was a lot of good things about it. In fact, some of those things that I learned have worked their way into this course. But what I found out about the format is there's a temporary kind of rah-rah and pick-me-up. But a lot of studies show that unless you practice something diligently for anywhere from 30 to 60 days, some studies, say closer to 30 days, some say more like 60 days. But if you don't practice it consistently over time, there's a chance that it can begin to fade. In fact, this is even true with the speaker notes. If you just listen to what the speaker says, I forget the exact, don't quote me on the exact percentages, but it's like you retain about 20% within 24 hours, and it's like 10% within 72 hours. And it's not the trend line that we want to see. Versus if you do something over time and you're reinforcing the principles over and over and over, like over a 6-month period, it tends to get more deeply ingrained in our subconscious mind. Those mental systems, the neurons, the synapses of our brain become hardwired with what we're learning and with these habits that we're cultivating and training on, especially with the homework. And we tend to assimilate it more and begin to live it in our life versus just a temporary pick-me-up, rah-rah, which is a great start. I don't disparage that in any way, but we felt that this was a much better format. And by doing it over 6 months also, you can do this course. It's about 2 hours a week, roughly. I mean, some weeks are a little less, some weeks are a little more, but it's about an hour of video and maybe an hour of homework. Some homeworks are maybe 20, 30 minutes of homework. And some weeks the video might be a little longer, or if it's a longer one, I might break it up into 2 40-minute videos instead of 1 hour-and-a-half video or something. But we try to do it in very manageable, bite-sized chunks that is you're able to assimilate. And then over that 6-month period, over time, and then also meeting with a mastermind group like the one that you're going to be hosting, you get a chance to unpack the material with a strategist like yourself, and then basically with other guys in the group. And we find that creates kind of a mastermind group. And a mastermind group, in that group, when you're with these other guys that are in sympathy and harmony with what you're trying to accomplish, everyone's trying to improve their life and be the best they can be and make the most out of the God-given talents that they've been given, right? I love the story of the talents in the Bible. There's so much wisdom in the Bible, but that story in particular, Jesus basically praised the one who made use of his talents. Mm-hmm. Well done, good and faithful servant. And the one who just buried his talent in the ground, did nothing with it. If I recall correctly, it's wicked and slothful servant. It's pretty strong words. So we want to be the guy that cultivates and develops that talent for good, for contribution. And so that's really what we're focused on. And by doing it in bite-sized chunks over a 6-month period, it's manageable. It doesn't interfere with the rest of your life in too extreme a way. And you ingrain those habits over 6 months. And then with the mastermind group, being with other like-minded guys, what we found, Peter, is you tend to get ideas as a result of that association with the other guys that are in sympathy and harmony with your purpose as well, just as you are with theirs. And there's a almost like a third mind, like a mastermind, that's where the term comes from, that's created, and you get great ideas as a result of that association that you might not have otherwise gotten on your own. Very akin to like when you and I have had conversations. You've said things that have triggered things in my thinking and made me think of things that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. And perhaps I had that effect on you. So that's really the beauty of it. It's walking, it's having that accompaniment with other guys that are on the same journey, and having that kinship, and then also having lessons that really reinforce the material and ingrain those habits, those life-changing habits over a 6-month period.
Yeah, that's what really attracted me too, was the element that you have really 3 parts to the structure. It's the 22 weeks, long, and then of course you have the lessons, and then you have a live mastermind, which is a huge dynamic because there's also a level of accountability as well as building up fraternity with other men who are seeking the same thing. And then you have the homework too, because if you don't apply it, it doesn't sink in. And so, and that's also kind of like when it comes to the ways that you can take this course. You could take it as it is, as a self-study. You could also take it with a group mastermind, and that group can be on the smaller end, could be 7 people, could have 30, could have more. Depends on the guide or the strategist, as we call it. Or you could even do a one-on-one, private strategy session going through it. Imagine 6 months with just a one-on-one where you're coached, you're mentored, and you really narrow in on those specific things that stand out that you don't get in the dynamic of a mastermind. So I think that those things really attracted me, but just the fact that the course itself stands on its own was I think what caught my attention, initially, as far as like this is something solid. I've never really seen anything like it. So that being said, you mentioned personal development, and I said too, that can be a nuanced term. I've had the question, what are the sources that are being drawn from? Because we've already heard you kind of allude to like some science, we've heard some psychology, we've heard some other thing. Like, what are those sources that you're drawing from?
Yeah, no, great question. So it's really the best personal development. Let me backtrack for a second to answer that question. Where it really started is when I got out of college. I got a job with a great telecommunications company that was an international company right out of college, working in Los Angeles. And I was living in Pasadena. And I was literally Pasadena, California, which is about a 20, 25-minute commute to my office. And being a young guy out of college with no money and a lack of experience, my parents graciously allowed me to live at home for a time until I could save up to get my own place. And so I was really enjoying this, this manageable commute, and being able to go home and have a hot meal that mom cooked and use the laundry machine on the weekends. And it was really great. And then about 6 months in, I found out we were moving our office from downtown Los Angeles, Pacific Mutual building, to basically the west side of LA near Santa Monica. And so my commute was going to be, go from like 25 minutes to about an hour and a half with traffic. Maybe some days a little less, but it basically was just, I thought, oh my, and that's each way. And I thought to myself, I'm going to be spending about 3 hours a day in the car. This is a nightmare. And so after the first day, I just said, the thing is, I could have moved to the west side of town, but, places were really expensive over there. I really want to live at home for a year and save money, be able to, save up for a down payment for a house. So I just decided to make the commute. And what ended up happening after the first day of just sitting in, mind-numbing bumper-to-bumper traffic in Los Angeles, which I'm sure people live in any big city in the world can probably relate to, I said, you know what, I can't waste 3 hours a day in the car just sitting around breathing, exhaust from the car in front of me. I got to do something productive with this time. And so I went to a bookstore and I started, because I was in sales, I started to buy books on sales. Because my dad was a capital management guy, I started to buy books on investing and finance. I started to buy books on marketing and real estate and buying rental properties and developing streams of passive income. And then I got into more like psychological stuff. What makes people tick? Why is it that some people have the same experience, but they have a totally different result of that experience? And that was actually triggered from a video I'd seen in one of my corporate trainings where there were two brothers that were like either twins or like a year apart. I can't remember the exact story, but they were separated at birth somehow. And one of them ended up being like in prison, incredible recidivism back in the, prison system. And the other one became super successful, in business and finances, personal life, spiritually. And when they asked both people, how did you end up this way, both guys, both men had the exact same answer. With an upbringing like I had, how could you get any other results? But the guy that ended up in prison said things were so bad, it was so rough, I had to fight street. The other guy said things were so bad, I made a decision that I don't care what it takes, I'm changing this. And so the same circumstances, but totally radically different results. And so then I started to study psychology. I studied, people like some of the best personal development authors like Earl Nightingale and Jim Rohn and a lot of the sales guys like Zig Ziglar and Brian Tracy and Tom Hopkins, and just so much wisdom. A lot of books that my dad, who had also been a student of always trying to improve himself, and it just filtered into every area of my life. Even books that I read from my sports career playing ball in college had to do with the psychology that winning athletes have, and how that same sort of psychology transfers into the professional workplace. And so in a short period of time, you can imagine, Peter, 3 hours a day, a minimum of 5 days a week. And you have somebody like, I'll pick somebody like a Warren Buffett, okay, who I don't agree with on everything, particularly some of his, spiritual principles. But as an investor, he's brilliant, right? And so, as we say, take the gold, leave the dirt. So I don't subscribe to all his philosophies, but I do subscribe. He's a phenomenal investor. And here's a guy that has been investing his whole life. He's in his 90s now. He's probably in his 60s back then when I was, first started listening to him. But he had about 45, 50 years of investing experience. And he wrote a book with the best of what he's learned in 50 years that I can read in like 6 or 8 hours, or maybe listen to on a book on tape, because it was still cassette tapes in those days. I'm dating myself here. But literally, I started to gain this profound knowledge. And I'm a kid of like 23, 24 years old, and I'm gaining the wisdom of guys in their 60s, 70s, 80s that have a lifetime of wisdom, assimilating all this material in business, finance, personal development, professionalism in the corporate space. I had one of my sales managers in particular was really good he just had a lot of street smarts. He was a very good salesperson, very honest and very ethical, and he had a lot of street smarts, and which even things like how you dress, how you show up, what's the right attire to wear for a certain meeting you're going to. Teaching me how to listen, because I tend to talk a lot, being able to listen to the customer, all these things that they're just skills that we need to learn, but I got such a heaping dose of it at a young age, and I marinated in it for years that I started to assimilate that and do it in my life, and I started to see the incredible results from it. And then I thought, my gosh, why didn't I learn this in college? Why did I learn in high school? These are the real life skills that are really important. I mean, I had a wonderful education. I was very blessed. But a lot of what I learned, to be quite frank, doesn't translate in my professional life. I'll never use it again. I'm thinking of some of the advanced math I had that has no bearing on my life now whatsoever. And I suffered through those classes, like statistics and so forth. But for some people, maybe if you're a financial wizard, or you're an engineer or a scientist, you might use that math. But I always thought, gosh, it'd be great if education could have been more tailored to things that really matter for what we want to do. And that was another point that I had, was that, in my whole career, my whole education, nobody ever asked me, hey, Bill, what do you love to do? What makes your heart sing? What is the thing that you do the best with the least amount of effort that just comes natural for you? What's the God-given gift or mission that you feel like you've been given? And nobody ever asked those questions. It was more just like, okay, sit down in my class, shut up, pay attention, and if you memorize enough of what I, spit at you, then you can pass my class, and then you can go to the next class, and then eventually you just, you graduate from college, and you send out as many resumes as you can. This is what people did. There was no intentionality, very little foresight or design, unless somebody knew they wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer or something very specific. But I would say for 60-70% of the people out there, it was a vague generality versus a meaningful specific. And so then you apply to all these companies, whichever one hires you first, you go to work for them. And then you just you work for them for 40, 50 years, and then you retire with a pension, and then you die a few years later. And I mean, that was literally, I'm over dramatizing it slightly, but there was a lack of intentionality. And I thought, gosh, if we really spent a little bit of time on the front end, we can really craft a life that is like magnificent, that juices us, that we love, that we can be engaged in work that is meaningful for us, that is joyous. I mean, have you ever seen somebody like who's so good at what they do, they're so passionate? Maybe it's like a Steve Jobs as an inventor, or working with technology, or like a phenomenal musician who just gets so absorbed in their craft, or like somebody like an athlete like a Michael Jordan or Larry Bird, who just didn't even have the talent of a Michael Jordan per se, athleticism wise, but just honed every element of the game of basketball, honed his skills. He just loved it. He ate, slept, and drank it. And I thought, what a blessing if you could be engaged in work like that really lights your fire, but nobody asks these questions. So all of this, it's a long-winded answer to your question, I know, but I'm coming back to it. It's basically, so I think your question was what personal development sources specifically. So some of the greatest authors of all time, some of the greatest leading business people, some of the greatest people in finance, in sales, in marketing, in real estate development, in theology. I mean, Fulton Sheen was one of my biggest mentors. And by the way, I'll remind you, I think you had shared with me once, like a huge percentage of his audience was not Catholic or even Christian sometimes, and yet he was extremely well respected. You know, he used to be invited to the Emmys in Hollywood,
right?
Or the Emmys. And in fact, he won an Emmy, and it was funny because he thanked his writer. You know, everybody's saying, "I want to thank my producer, my writer, my publicist." He's like, "I want to thank my writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John."
Right.
And so he really would meet people where they're at, and then he would actually give them a lesson, really coming from the treasures of the church with Catholic theology and apologetics, and sometimes even mysticism, but in a way where he was explaining in such a beautiful way that people could relate to him. My grandmother, who was Episcopalian, loved Fulton Sheen. She would watch him all the time, and at the end of her life, she actually converted to Catholicism because of his example, or in large part because of his example. So it's some of the best of breed sources out there. A lot of the people I met along the way who were super successful and also had the spiritual life. They had the great family. They weren't just only focused on one thing, one of those categories within the arena. I knew a lot of people in my Silicon Valley days, they were really good focusing on the money part, but the family, the life, the health, a lot of those things were not as well in balance. So I really thought having that whole balance wheel. So it's really a best of breed collection of the best wisdom that myself and the other co-founder that we've learned over the years from some of the wisest people that have ever lived, and extrapolating the very best of that wisdom. Like I said, picking the fruit. We studied all the roots, so we're just picking the fruit, and you can study the roots later if you want, but we're picking the very best fruit and then organizing it into a systematic fashion over 6 months, and in the right order and sequence, starting with dreaming, right? Because so much of it, we've forgotten how to dream. And working on the mind first, because so many things that manifest in our external world start with the internal world. So even the way it's laid out, the order and sequence, or the syntax of it, is really important. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think you answered a bunch of questions in there, because there's also that whole question of, okay, you have these passions, you have these experiences. So why this class? Why right now? I think you've answered that, pretty well. And there's that whole question too, that of the terminology. You hear personal development. You also hear human formation. And, I've gone through the Masterclass, and so many surprises that I had. I mean, just from what you're talking about, that really caught my attention. There are so many things and principles, things that help us as men to be able to succeed in all the aspects of our life. But success can be a very ambiguous word. You could be successful, but for the wrong things. You mentioned intentionality. Intentionality is huge. You mentioned rewiring. We have to be rewired. My theologian side is about to jump in here, because it's like, all these effects of original sin. But one of the biggest ones that we don't deal with, especially in the Catholic world, is this human formation. And that human formation is that psychological development that we have that comes from our experiences of the world and things that affect us, and that cause all the disorders and dysfunctions that are in the world. But as Fulton Sheen always says, there isn't anything that happens in the world. Look at all the evils that doesn't first start within man, and we've got to rewire that. Yeah. Just one comment I wanted from you, because this ties into that same question of just kind of where you're drawing from. And having gone through the course, you draw even from like physiology and those kinds of things. Like there's there's actually a connection between what happens in our bodies and our brains, our physical brains, that is affected like in a psychosomatic way by those things that influence us. And that's a big part, at least for me, especially, and why I really like it for other people, is because it deals with that reality of we have to address those things because, as we learn, 95% that drives our actions are subconscious. When I heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, that like explains a lot. And nobody wants to go and deal with those kinds of things, and I was like, it was kind of mind blowing for me, but maybe you could just comment a little bit about that, because sometimes people who are just kind of, they're science fanatics, and like this draws of that important connection.
Yeah, no, it's a good point you bring up. We have several lessons that kind of talk about the brain and how our brain works, but roughly, 5 to 10% of our brain is a conscious mind, and roughly 90 to 95% is a subconscious mind. But when people are trying to change certain habits or behaviors, they're trying oftentimes from just their conscious mind, but they haven't rewired their subconscious. So you could have something in there that's been wired for a long time, and it becomes very difficult to break that habit unless you consciously go in and rewire it. I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. When I was a little kid, I remember in the 70s, my dad took me to the Dallas Cowboys training camp, and Roger Staubach was their quarterback. And I grew up in Southern California, and of course the Dallas Cowboys were in Texas, but they used to have their training camp in Thousand Oaks. So one day my dad took me there because Roger Staubach, the legendary Hall of Fame quarterback, was one of my favorite quarterbacks. Also a devout Catholic man, I understand, interestingly enough for our conversation here. But I remember, because I love Roger Staubach, he was paid to be a pitchman for Rolaids. It's like an antacid tablet, like Tums, or I think they're still around. But I remember from the 70s, there was a commercial, and he'd say, "How do you spell relief? Rolaids, Rolaids." I still remember that from decades ago, because I'd see that commercial and I'd associate it with Roger Staubach, my favorite quarterback, one of my favorite football players. And so things get wired. I remember I had a coach once. I was blessed to have some really wonderful coaches growing up, some wonderful teachers, great mentors of all kinds. But one of my coaches, probably not meaning to, probably just trying to motivate me, but he was a little harsh at times. And I remember that got wired in. There was a little performance anxiety. Specifically, this was in like a little league baseball. And my dad couldn't quite figure it out, I remember, anyway, I solved the problem. My dad basically rewired my thinking, and we went to the batting cage. He built up my confidence and ended up being great from there. But that was my first lesson in really rewiring, and how somebody could actually, in your environment, oftentimes our family members, people can be overly sarcastic, or let's say, "Oh, you can't do that," or "You're not good enough to do that." "Oh, sure, you'll never do that." Those kinds of things. And sometimes those can get rewired. Or, even like name calling or bullying at a school. "You're a wimp, you're stupid, you're whatever, tall, short, fat, skinny, pick your adjective." And those kinds of things can get wired, and sometimes they can be deep-seated wounds. Some kids more naturally dismiss them. Some kids really internalize them, and there's a lot of different personalities out there, and people react to the same stimuli or experiences in different ways. But I found that you got to rewire that subconscious mind first to make sure everything is in harmony and you're going the same direction intentionally. Otherwise, you experience this like inner civil war unless you get that right. So a big part of the first several lessons in the class is really getting the mind right, because everything first begins in the mind. Everything you see around you, if you look in your room right now, the beautiful wood paneling behind you, that microphone you're speaking into, that beautiful sport coat, it all began as a thought, an idea in somebody's mind. And then it manifested in reality through their thought. But it all begins in the thoughts. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. The carpenter from the plains of Galilee once said. So I think it's very powerful. We have to start there. And that's where a lot of people get messed up. A lot of it is just a battle for the mind. Because when the mind is right, if your inner world is right, your outer world tends to reflect that. And this is true. I mean, being in the course, the last lesson I did, lesson 20, was about creating an ideal workspace. And it was about organization and crafting a beautiful workspace that really creates the environment where you thrive and where it's organized, where things are. And so I was doing some retidying this weekend myself, and I noticed that there were certain things that I had to rewire. One of the great things about teaching this class is I also get to reaffirm these things in my mind, and it really reinforces me to live it, because I'm marinating in the material so often. So we have to be so conscious. when our desk is a mess, or our living environment, or clothes are strewn all over the floor, everything's in a, it might be that our inner world is a little confused and messy at the time. At least I've noticed that's true for my life and a lot of people that I've had the privilege to, coach and mentor and work with. And at the same time, when your mental world is correct and it's straight, it's peaceful, it's smooth, it's balanced, then your outer world tends to reflect that with order and peace. So everything begins with the mind. So we start there. We start with rewiring the subconscious mind. And it's very much akin to anything, if you take, like, for example, a record, remember those old record players, like when you and I were kids, before CDs came along or MP3, we had actual physical LPs. It's like there's a hardwired pattern in that record. And that's why it plays a certain song or a certain recording a certain way. But if I take a razor blade and I scratch those things, it'll never play the same way again. It'll skip, it'll loop. And so that's a rough analogy of what we're doing. We're actually making sure that if there is some faulty wiring there, if we picked up some negative thinking along the way or some negative habits or negative traits, first of all, the sacraments of the church are beautiful for this, for getting our spirit and mind in harmony. But then we might still have a proclivity for a weakness in a certain area. And by hardwiring the opposite of that, the behavior that we want to actually enact, then we can actually take the time to do that through auto-suggested, repeated affirmation. And so, there's a scripture, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I think it's Philippians 4:13, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head. And I know a lot of athletes that had some performance anxiety that would repeat that over and over and over. I know a Christian pastor minister friend of mine. He's not Catholic. He's a Christian evangelical, and he's actually counseled people in his church to use that verse because it's marinating your mind in Christ. It's basically focusing on Christ. And so anything positive can be rewired in our mind intentionally, just like anything negative. And advertisers know this, believe me. They'll wire you. You hear these commercials, certain songs that have lyrics that are less than ideal, we might say, to put it nicely. And we have to be so careful of what we let into our mind. We have to be so careful to guard it, particularly as a parent with our children, with mass media, with what they're listening to, if they're on their cell phone. And we want to make sure we're putting good stuff in our mind and putting a big firewall to keep the bad stuff out. So that's a big part of the rewiring process. And once we do that in our subconscious mind, we find the behavior that we're trying to adopt that has maybe been difficult up to that point. When the subconscious mind gets it, it's much easier to follow, and if only your conscious mind gets it. And those positive changes tend to last and stick.
Well, this is certainly a fire hose with coming at us here in this Q&A here. I'm going to move on to another question that I received that was more specific about the Fulton Sheen Institute, because that is, there's that question: what is the relationship here? Because I am a man school strategist as well, so that I can actually lead the masterminds, or I can also do one-on-one coaching. And so the question was, what does the Fulton Sheen Institute, and in particular Dr. Howard, me, as a man school strategist, bring to the experience? And this is why I got so excited, because Fulton Sheen Institute, this is all how Fulton Sheen would work. I'm a Catholic theologian. I have a doctorate in sacred theology. And I've also been a professor in many capacities of different courses. And one in particular always struck me was spiritual theology. The premise of that is you have to have first an adequate anthropology before you start getting into the spirit, because everything is related. And that's why this human formation of the psychological influences, that are part of it, all of those things on a natural level, they serve as the foundation upon which everything else builds. And then grace, as we learn in theology, St. Thomas, grace perfects nature. So, add to that the fact that I am my passion and expertise is in Fulton Sheen, who has some of the greatest insights into the human person and Christian philosophy of life, and all of these things. I'm excited to be able to share because they're going to help. Because a lot of people will complain, their spiritual problems, and it's like the demonic and this demonic. Well, the demonic is loose today. I don't have to prove that to anybody. However, I remember there was an exorcist. And Father Forteo, he's from Spain, and he said something along the lines that was like 70% of the problems that we have of our just from our own doing, our own behaviors of things. They're not just, oh, the devil's causing all of these things. It's no, you have a lot to work on. And once you start doing that, once you start going deeper and actually dealing with these things, getting your mind right, getting new habits into your life, getting a lot of the things that we have the power to do with our natural faculties, then we open ourselves and we free ourselves up for the Holy Spirit to be able to work with us. So this goes across the board. So that was another part that really excited me, and something that I'm looking forward to bringing into the masterminds, even for one-on-ones, especially with one-on-ones. I really like to dive into those things because it's a focus on that person. But this is, Fulton Sheen's a man who inspired millions around the world, and his predominant audience was actually 60% non-Catholic at his prime. When he was, on the television, John Paul II practices English from him. But even communists were attracted to him because he spoke truth about the human person, and he went to the heart of the human condition. But he never left it there. He wanted to repair that so that then he could then give the higher wisdoms, because there's a level of wisdoms. But we have to be really careful not to divorce these things, rather than see that they are intimately linked. And you can't build, you can't have a building that starts in the clouds, in the sky. It's got to be rooted in the ground. And so that's what I have found that this course has brought to me. And I know it's going to bring to a lot of men, because as you mentioned, it's all the arenas of life that this applies to. You may be really strong in, half of them, or maybe 80%, but that 20% may be the one thing that's actually pulling the greater part of your life down. So I'm really excited about, that's what I think the Fulton Sheen Institute, and what I'm personally going to be bringing into this, as a mastermind strategist and as a one-on-one coach. I'm really excited about that. So I hope that answers that question. As far as
I just want to echo that. I'm really excited to have you on board too, because your expertise in that area. Sometimes people divorce those two, like you said, but they're very harmonious. They should be in complete harmony. The personal development, the human formation, and the spiritual formation. And of course, of the two, the spiritual formation is more important in the long run, right? Ultimately, heaven is the goal. But at the same time, we're called to be salt and light of the earth. We're called to, evangelize the whole world. We're called to leaven the world. We're called to be, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Catholics should be the best workers. We should be the best accountants, the best lawyers, the best business people, the best teachers, the most honest, ethical. And unfortunately, we fall short many times in many categories. But when you think about it, those two things should be in perfect symbiotic harmony. They should not be devoid. Working on your human formation, right? Your natural human skills, your professionalism, all those things, those don't subtract from your spirituality. In fact, I would argue they add to it. They give you a broader depth. And I've had conversations with people I know who will remain nameless, that they mentor some seminarians. And I remember asking one of these gentlemen, hey, how's it going? How's the new crop of seminarians? And he said, there's some fantastic guys, really promising. They're going to make great priests. There's all the guys are just very virtuous. They love the Lord. They're on fire. He's like, but my one worry is a lot of them, just because they're so young, they don't have a lot of life experience, they're really lacking human formation. This is what he told me before I ever told him about what I was doing with the man school or anything else. He said, I said, what do you mean? He said, well, some of them are just shy, like they won't look you in the eye. They give you kind of a weak handshake. There's just a sense of a lack of confidence. They're spiritual. They love the Lord. God bless them. It's a good start. It's a great foundation to start from. But they just need to mature in their skills. And he said, some of these guys, I can't see them leading a parish with like several thousand people and with the skill set where they're at right now. So there's some growth that's going to take place there. And with God's help, they'll get there. But he said, he was telling me, as a guy who mentors seminarians, even seminarians who have the spiritual part right, which again, amen, that's the most important, God bless them, but they're lacking in human formation. So many people, and of course in the world, there's also a total lack of human formation, and sometimes a propensity for serious sin, right? Serious life habits that are not constructive, that can lead you down a dark path. And so we're all broken, we're all human, we're all trying to do the best we can, but I get a little, I kind of cringe sometimes when people try to divorce the human formation from the
Right.
spiritual formation. I think they should be in perfect symbiosis. We got to breathe with both lungs. And it reminds me of an analogy that Fulton Sheen made between, free enterprise capitalism that we had in the Western. Of course, he was very active preaching at the height of the Cold War. So you'd had like all of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union at the time, now Russia, that was under this atheistic communism. And then here we have this, free enterprise democracy. And yet, what he used to say, it's like, what we have in the West, it's like Christ. We have Christ, but without the cross. He's like, what they have in the East, they have the cross without Christ.
Exactly.
And I always thought that was such a beautiful, as only Fulton Sheen could do. He had a beautiful way of articulating the situation and truths in a way. So what I think, yes, the spiritual is by far the most important, and that's the beauty of your formation as a doctorate in theology, an incredibly well-read, well-formed, expert in apologetics and theology and philosophy, bringing the best of the human formation. What a beautiful symbiosis that you can bring to this that, a lot of people can't. I don't have your depth of theology. I consider myself a devout Catholic practicing, and I know a lot, but I've chosen to kind of, we made the choice to cast a wide net and reach out to those that not necessarily preach the choir, but reach out to everyone and try to bring them in. So that was a conscious decision we felt God was leading us to do. Just like there's different ministries. There's ministries
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There's ministries to drug addicts on the street. There's ministries to homeless people. There's ministries to businessmen, So that was, we decided, we felt like that was discerning from God. That was our lane.
Right.
But I think you're in a unique position to really, have a beautiful marriage of that spiritual formation with the very best human formation and meld that together in a beautiful way. Just like Jesus was fully divine and a divine nature and a human nature, I think there's a beautiful symbiosis there where we can be salt and light and begin to live the life of heaven here on earth by being an encourager, by being positive, by helping people, by setting an example, by the way we show up with every encounter. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, Peter. There's certain people that I've met in my life that just when I'm in there, they're so accomplished, they're so virtuous, they're so just polished in every way, that just being in their presence just makes me happy, lifts my spirits, or I just kind of go, wow, that guy is just, there's something special about him. And I think that's, we're striving to create that beautiful symbiosis between the best human formation with the deepest spiritual formation. I think that's the uniqueness that the Fulton Sheen Institute and you specifically are going to be able to bring to this program and take it to another level.
Yeah, well, I that's our hope and our intention. I listened to a man who's a clinical psychologist, is a Catholic clinical psychologist, Dr. Peter Malinowski, recently, and he spoke the same language. And what he does with this too, because he's working in this field also, which he accurately calls, he's like, this is a niche field because it's so needed, but it's not quite yet discovered the way it should be. And what he described, what he's doing, and those of us who are really in this this kind of a movement, he described it as it's like John the Baptist. Human formation prepares the way for the Lord. We've got to remove those impediments in our natural human life. All those kinds of things that are psychological. We've got to remove those impediments. We got to build up and mature the ones that we need to once that's done. And we have to remember that Jesus, what does it say in Luke 2, is it 52, I think? What did he do? He grew in wisdom and favor.
Stature and knowledge before
exactly.
God. Yeah.
And favor before God and with man. Why? For the way he acted. 30 years he was with his family having this human formation. And his divinity was never even known until the wedding feast at Cana. So it's, we learn a lot, even though in the silence of those 30 years, we learn the importance of family. We learn the importance of what was his upbringing like. Well, we can have an idea. Jesus is perfect God. He's true man or true God, and he's true man. He actually, this is a heart of Catholic teaching on Christology, is he had to be perfected, even though he's God, but he had to grow in that perfection and mature in that all the stages of life. So that's why I get excited about this. We can keep going on and on about this. But I wanted to, just looking at the time here, I just wanted to kind of wrap it up here because I think we've covered the structure of the course, the 22 weeks or 6 months, the 3 different ways you can do it in a group. You could do it one-on-one with a private coach or strategist, or you could even do it as a self-study. Obviously it kind of goes down with accountability and maximum results. Is the more you're with somebody guiding you, that's natural. Anybody in sports will tell you that.
Right.
And I think that why don't you just give us in 1 minute why you think men should take this masterclass? Putting you on the spot, I know.
We're all called to become the very best that we can be. We're all called to be salt and light in this world. And unfortunately, a lot of the very best professional and personal development wisdom that I learned over a long career through a lot of great books from studying those that went before me, the best way to learn something is through somebody else's experience. I mean, if you can avoid mistakes, you should learn from your mistakes, but it's even better to learn from somebody else's mistakes who's got maybe 50 more years of life experience in a certain category than you do and has written a book that you can read, again, and get 50 years of experience in 8 or 10 hours, however long it takes you to read that book, and start to apply those things in your life. So I felt an obligation I've got a lot of nieces and nephews now in their early 20s that are graduating from school, and I feel an obligation to hey, let me try to help you get ahead faster and become the best that you can be and give you a lot of wisdom rather than just letting you fumble around like a bumper pool, or a pinball getting bounced around by life. Let's be intentional. Let's figure out, what is your God-given mission? What is that unique mission that our Creator has given you? And how can we discover and uncover what that is, which is the first part of this course? And how do we help you get the right mindset to make that happen so that you follow through, so that you're disciplined, and so that you're pulled. You don't have to push yourself and force that discipline. You're so excited by this compelling vision of your future that you're naturally just pulled towards it. And how do we share this wisdom that so many others have already learned, so you don't have to relearn it yourself and waste time. You don't have to retake the same ground. We can save you decades of trial and error learning. And then at the same time, I always say, who you are is God's gift to you. Who you become is your gift to God. And that's taking the talents that He's given you and molding them. So we should work like heck to try to become the greatest gift that we can be to others, and serve others as best we can, and make the greatest contribution in this life that we can. So one day, when we meet our Creator, we graduate to heaven, it's well done, good and faithful servants. And it won't be like the story of the talents where the guy, when He congratulated the guys that doubled their talents and the guy that hit his talent on the ground, He said, wicked and slothful servant. We don't want to be that guy. And I think that parable is in there for a lesson. And so I truly believe that we have almost a divine obligation to make the most of what we've been given, to cultivate our talents to the maximum in order to serve others. Not for materialism, not for vanity, not for any of those reasons, or hedonism. In the case of, I've seen people go off the deep end. There's an old saying: you can fall off the boat on the port or the starboard side. And I know a guy I worked with who was really conscious of being healthy, and he had some wonderful, great workout habits. And he and I used to train together, but he went so far off the deep end that it turned into like hedonism almost, or like an obsession. And that's why we talk about having that balance, that wheel of life, where everything is in balance. Health and wellness is important, and making the most of your physical body, so that which is the temple of the spirit, right? That you're going to carry you through this life. But every category has to be there. Of course, the spiritual has to.
Oh. Hang on 1 second. Let me pull this up. We had a problem here. Oh. Hey, well, it looks like we may have lost Bill. Looks like our feed is still going here. Well, hopefully, let's see if I can get a response. Rick, since you're watching us, are you able to hear me? Rick, are you able to hear me? Okay, well, good. Now that I know that you can see me, Rick, you can see me. Okay, you can hear me. Okay. Well, good. Well, something happened to Bill, and I'll edit that out on the replay because there will be a replay of this, and that's why I challenged Bill to 1 minute. That was an Italian minute. I'm going to give you my under 60 seconds version of why I think this course is important and why men should seriously consider taking it. Jesus said, I've come to give you life and have it to the full. And that fullness is who we are in our body, mind, and spirit. And like Bill said, I agree that we have an obligation, and a duty to make the best of what God has given us. And so just as much as we have to have a spiritual plan of life, it is as important that we have a human formation plan for our lives. I remember what Sister Lucia wrote to a Cardinal Cafara, who started an institute for marriage and the family under John Paul II. And she said, the final battle between God and Satan will be over marriage and the family. A lot of the battles that we face in our marriage and family, whether it deal with finances, work, spousal relationships, respect, trust, raising our kids, yes, we are being attacked like crazy from the outside, but the devil doesn't control our minds. He doesn't control us unless we let him. He can try to influence us. And so what do we have to do? We've got to make sure that our relationships are right, the parts that we need to put into that. That's so crucial. And that's most of that, just like that one exorcist said, is our human formation. So this masterclass really guides us through from the very beginning. Oh, sounds like he's coming in here. Most of our human formation is going to be a big part of what we're doing, in order to actually engage in that battle. So we do what we can spiritually. We do what we also have to do with our formation. So we got Bill joining us here, and I'm just wrapping up on my American minute versus your Italian minute, and I hope that we've been able to answer a lot of the key questions that you've had. One of the things I want to say is that if any of this has resonated with you in any way, any one of these things, I want to encourage you, reach out to me directly. You can do so just by going to the fultonsheen.institute, and you'll see right there's a link that takes you to the masterclass page. And there's a link, and just schedule a call with me. I love to talk with you about the kinds of things that you want to see increase in your life, things you want to see decrease in your life, things that are going to make a big difference. Maybe it's a massive adjustment of just what your overall goal or aim in life is, and you're in a moment of rediscovery as the whole world is being put through a reset. We men are we're looking at these things and like, well, what am I created for this moment in history? That's a big part of it. But the other part may be, I just want my marriages and my marriage and my family solid. This is going to help that. So I encourage you and I invite you just to give me a call. We'll have it's like a free discovery call. We'll look at what it is that you want to, kind of open the window, deep dive in just for a little bit and get into, see an idea. So just do that. You could, and there's also a link in the description for this webinar. Just go in there. You can click there. That'll take you to the website page for the masterclass, and you'll see a direct link to how to schedule a call with me. I know for those who have to go, hey, thank you for staying on to this to the end here. And I do want to look at the questions that we've had, or some of the comments we've had in the chat here, because I'd like to answer them. We've had Rick, who's just been with us from beginning to end, from Australia. I can't even do the accent. Australia. And it's good to see you, Rick. I'm curious to know where you are in that enormous country. But let's see here. One of your questions, you had a lot of comments here that were great to see. One of them that really hit me was you said, can you do this on a diocesan level? Yeah, absolutely. That's my goal, being so connected within the ministry and the life of the church. I think that this is critical. I think it should be at a diocesan level for administration of a diocese, a chancery. Having worked for a bishop and in a chancery, goodness gracious, can you imagine seeing a transformation of a chancery when, hopefully we can get rid of that saying, if you want to lose your faith, work for the church. I mean, Well, okay, there can be a lot of truth to that. But just imagine the transformation of leadership, and also having something that we can pass on. I'd also would encourage the invitations really to seminaries. John Paul II, in his letter for seminarians and the formation of priests, Dabo Vobis, he specifically called for this concentration that hasn't quite been there in this human formation. Those are the exact words. And so I would say, yes, contact me about that. It doesn't really matter where you are. As long as I don't have to get a vaccine to get there, I'll go there. That's where I draw the line, to be honest, which is, crazy in our world. But this should be really this is the formation for strong leaders, no matter what it is. We all require aspects of this, maybe all of it, especially if you're starting from your dream. If you're relooking at your life, then there's a lot that you're going to have to kind of retool and rewire to do that. If you're in ministry, if you're I like to call them like a Catholicpreneur. If you are an innovator, you feel called to do something, but you're scared to death about how you're going to do it because there's just a lot of fear that comes in. I know exactly what that's like, just starting an institute and having done things on the road with my family, starting from scratch. You need faith and you need mindset and skills. You need all of them or you're not going to quite make it. But often the mindset and the skill set and the human formation is what stops us. We hit the roadblocks. I can't do this. And God's not just going to hand it over on a silver platter. It's who you become throughout all of that really makes the difference in the end. So that's a great question, Rick, and I'd love to talk to you about that. So if you want to reach out to me and specifically let me know what diocese you're in, that would help too. But, Zoom gets us linked across the world in an instant. So just have to coordinate our time zones. So
yeah,
let's
and I can
see.
tell you, Peter, we have, just as an adjunct to that, we have some powerhouse women in Australia in the women's school. And I know because my wife is their strategist and she's mentoring them. And there's a movement happening in Australia, I'll tell you in particular. So yeah, definitely get connected with Peter. It's a great question, and see if we can get creative. And I'd love to.
Well, Rick,
Rick,
you may be. Yeah, Rick, you could be a catalyst for doing something like this. I mean, I always tell people too. I've done a lot of speaking around the country and other places. Knowledge is responsibility. So it's sort of a caveat emptor when you hear these things, because have this knowledge is a responsibility, especially when you realize, oh my gosh, this is missing. I love this. This is speaking my language. I know what this is going to do to people, even if it was like 30% from where they are now. For most people, that's usually over a hump. And so I say, look, just like Mother Teresa would say to people, the need is the call. Is this resonating with you personally? If there's things that you want to, you may say, I just want to go through this and really get tweaked myself and strengthened and become really the full man that God has created me to be. A fully integrated Catholic, that's the summary of the whole thing. Be a fully integrated Catholic, body, mind, and spirit. Then that's great. But if you're saying, my goodness, look at these guys, imagine what these men could be. That's the part that gets me excited. That's the part that gets me excited when I think about, gosh, how much God has to do with me. But I'm like, gosh, I don't know my full potential. But am I willing to take that risk of my ego and other things and submit it? Why? So that I'm the best man for my wife. I'm the best man for my 6 kids. I'm the best man for the Fulton Sheen Institute. And when people aren't just moved and inspired by the truth, but they see it lived in me, because that's what makes all the difference. The word became flesh. God didn't write a book. He didn't just assign another prophet. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And because now with Pentecost having come through just this last week, imagine a fully integrated man, like on fire with the Holy Spirit. These are the men that are going to change the entire world in the way that God wants it. So that's maybe my final comments for this webinar. So Rick, get in touch with me. It's awesome. I can kind of feel your passion just looking at your comments. So
yeah, Peter, one thing I could add to that too is if I think we could make one of the lessons available for people to watch if they want to get a little teaser or taste to get a sense of what they're getting into. We can make that available as well, and we could do that. Maybe you and I can talk offline. Where you put something on your website where your listeners could basically go on and watch a partial lesson, either a portion of a lesson, or maybe we'll make one of the lessons available to view. If that's something that would be of interest to you and your people, I'd be happy to do that.
Sure. Yeah, that would be awesome. And Rick, where are you in Australia? You could put that in the chat. That'd be nice to know. You and
if you're near the Great Barrier Reef, I want to come visit you.
Queensland, where Northern Territory. In my old 80s days, and 90s days, I don't know if you are, I was a huge Midnight Whale fan. So it's kind of hard not to think of Peter Garrett when you're talking about Australia. So to see his career go up and down in the sense of he entered into politics and all that, it was funny. So what does that say? We got Wollongong. I love the names. Was there like another one? Walla Walla? I think it's another one. I had a friend, but he was from Melbourne. He was my roommate in college for a year. And so anyway, well, this is great. Rick, let's get in touch. The Diocese of Wollongong, 60 miles south of Sydney. So you're really close. Let's do that. Thanks, Rick, for joining us. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, Bill, that we didn't cover.
Is there an email where people can reach you, or you may have posted that? I can't see that where I am right now in the studio here,
yeah, you could also email me. You can schedule a call. That's through Zoom. It'll be a Zoom call. There's a link right on the website. You can also email me directly. Just put Fulton Sheen Institute at gmail.com. And that'll be another good way to get us connected. And of course, there's the website itself, fultonsheen.institute. There is a good introduction video with Bill that he did before they launched their very first class back in November that really caught me and drew my attention to this. I think you'll find that very helpful. And then I'll talk with Bill and we can look about having a sample lesson up and, we can make this work. I'm just kind of curious, Rick, what time is it in Australia right now? It's obviously the 28th, but
tomorrow morning, I think. Yeah.
When I was in the Philippines, I think it was relatively around that time, but I forget what it was. So, well, anyway, this has been great. Thank you, Bill, for helping me to answer these questions that have come in. These are common questions that people have, and I know that we certainly gave more than ample meat for them to chew on. But I think that this is going to be a great blessing to the church and its new evangelization. And I think that, I think there's only good things coming.
Yeah, one of the things I'm most encouraged about is just the letters that I get back, the emails I get from people that have been through the course, and the transformations that are taking place in their life as a result of these lessons and applying these lessons. And that's what I live for, that kind of feedback, because that really excites me the most. Mm-hmm. And we're all about helping people become the very best version of themselves, to transform their lives, to live the life of their dreams, the life they're called to live, and to give them the mindsets and the skill sets and the tools to make that happen. So, and the unique thing with the Fulton Sheen Institute is you're also going to get a really integrated sense of the most important spiritual aspects of Catholicism and how they tie together with that best of breed human formation. So it's a unique opportunity, and I encourage you guys to definitely take advantage of it and reach out to Peter. And Peter, if you ever need me to be a part of that too, I'm happy to come back anytime, and just really excited for all the things that you're going to be able to share and do with your people here. So thank you so much for having me on. It's been great being here.
Well, thank you, Bill. And just as I said earlier, there will be a replay of this. So that will be on the Fulton Sheen Institute website. So fultonsheen.institute, look for the replay. And obviously I'll edit out certain things that might not need to be there, just so that we just keep it right onto the meat of things. And I encourage you, invite your friends, let them know about this. This is how this spreads. If this really got you on fire and you're like, oh my goodness, we finally have something like this, let your friends know, because especially if you're interested in going through this, which I hope you are, you could start working on a group of men right now who can go through it with you. Just imagine what your fraternity and your community will be like when you know you've got 4 or 5 other guys going through this formation with you, what God can do. Look what he did with 12. Look what he did with 1 on Pentecost. And the day before that, he was petrified. And then the next day, 3,000 people. So that's the awesome part of that. Let God multiply it, but let us get out and do the groundwork for him. So thanks again, Bill. It's great to have you next door in Montana. And yes, we look forward to the future. So thanks, Rick, and everybody who's joined us. God bless you all.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, everyone.